Wireless Fundamentals, Battle of the Bands. I think this is going to be the last primer material that we have because I really just needed to lay a foundation so we could talk a common language as we get into our deployment of wireless at an actual customer location. So my goal for this nugget is that by the time we're done here, you will understand the purpose of 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi frequencies and the benefits and challenge of each, and I'll throw in a little extra, and the fundamentals of how to design each of these frequencies. Well, let's start off with a little bit of review. We were just talking about frequencies, and you'll start understanding why I chose the title, The Battle of the Bands. There are many different wireless frequencies that can handle data communication. Matter of fact, in the previous nugget, we looked at the United States spectrum of frequency, and almost all of those carry some form of data over the airwaves using different radio frequencies. Well, in the mainstream Wi-Fi networking world, two frequencies were selected to carry our data traffic, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. And these are two completely separate bands, as in not compatible. As in, if you've got a device that says, I am a 2.4 gigahertz device, it literally will not work on a 5 gigahertz network, and vice versa. Nowadays, a lot of the network cards that are manufactured are actually both frequencies. So they actually have antennas. If we could tune into our alien-looking laptop there, they have antennas that can tune into both frequencies. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Originally, the first band to really take hold was the 2.4 gigahertz band. And when I say the word band, I should be saying the word range, because that's really what's happening here is 2.4 gigahertz is a range of frequencies in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. Remember, there's frequencies such as 2.401, 2.402, 3, 4, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all the little frequencies inside of this 2.4 gigahertz space. Now, first off, a step backwards and a flyby review. When we say frequency, as in radio frequency, the word frequency literally refers to how many times you go up and down or complete a complete waveform within a second. So a 2.4 gigahertz frequency is literally an up and down 2.4 billion times within a second, and 5 gigahertz is just that, 5 billion repetitions within a second of that cycle. So immediately, one of the big differences that you see between these two, one is a lower frequency, thus it is able to carry less data, and the other is a higher frequency. Now, when wireless first came out, 5 gigahertz was kind of a novelty. It was introduced as 802.11a. That was the wireless standard that took that one, while this one was 802.11b. And I still remember when I was first rolling out wireless and everyone's like, oh, dude, don't buy the 802.11a. Nothing's compatible with it. Who would get, it's like the subparts. I believed that 802.11a, I mean, even the name, I'm like, well, it must have been first, so maybe B is now better because B is better, right? So they've evolved since then, but the opposite is actually true. 802.11b was first to market, and nobody has been able to give me a clear answer why. And please don't email or Twitter me or anything like that, because at this point I don't really care. I've heard things like silicon shortages. I've heard things like the equipment was far more expensive to manufacture. I heard things like mafia involvement. I mean, just wild and crazy stuff. But eventually 2.4 just was like, that was the one that started the whole wireless network industry. And the beauty of it, and this is my theory, is that when people looked at it, they thought, oh, well, this one goes farther. Meaning the 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency can travel farther than the 5 gigahertz spectrum. And I'll give you a little reality behind that. The truth be told, if you take both of these spectrums out in a big empty space, like you fly to the moon and you bring up a wireless access point on this big empty terrain, they would actually go about the same. Matter of fact, 5 gigahertz might even go a little farther than 2.4. But the key attribute is 2.4 is not as affected by absorption as a higher frequency like 5 gigahertz. And what I mean by that is you get just a little wireless access point broadcasting out and there's a wall, right? 2.4 gigahertz will pass far easier through that wall than 5 gigahertz actually will. The wall doesn't actually stop 5 gigahertz, but it absorbs it a lot more. right? And the name of the game when wireless first came out was coverage, coverage, coverage. How far does your wireless coverage go? And as fate would have it, the question we ask nowadays is, well, how much can you contain that coverage? Don't let it go too far, right? And we'll look at some of the reasons why when we get into our practical deployment of this, but that wasn't how it all started. In the beginning, it was, man, farther is better. The more, if that wireless access point can cover the whole neighborhood, man, that's great. Well, nowadays, we actually think of a wireless access point covering the whole neighborhood as a very bad thing, and for two reasons. Number one, the wireless access point is powerful. I don't know why this is popping into my head right now. You guys remember the Jolly Green Giant? He may even still be around. I think he was like broccoli commercials or something. Green Giant, you got this big... This is terrible. This big giant guy on the commercial, Jolly Green, he's kind of walking around, and he's like, hello, he's bringing nutrition to kids everywhere or something like that, right? The access point is the Jolly Green Giant. It's like, hello, and it goes way out here. Now, a laptop, a tablet, an iPhone, an Android, whatever you're using, it's got an antenna as well, and it's not a Jolly Green Giant. It's a little mouse. Here's my little mouse right here, right? And so when it's, when this guy's like, hello, and what does this guy on his wireless signal see? Those little cell signal looking like things. He's like, man, this is a powerful signal. And this is, by the way, what I'm telling you right now will probably solve 30% of all the wireless issues that you have. I'm just throwing a random stat out there. Because this is a very common issue where the Jolly Green Giant is yelling out, hello, hello, and this little mouse is like, hello, hello. And by the time it gets back to there, the Jolly Green Giant can't hear it. The wireless access point can't hear it. So we started realizing, well, wait a sec. If we just go into our wireless access point and crank the power way up to high, then that means we're going to shoot that signal way out to clients who will see it, and this is such a misleading thing. They see it and they report a really solid wireless signal, but when they try to connect to it, their receiver can't get back. Remember, network communication is always a two-way thing, right? That's the number one reason that we don't want our wireless access point to cover a whole neighborhood. The second is because wireless access has become ubiquitous, meaning it's everywhere, right? Everybody and their brother and their mother has a wireless access point in their house. So if you've got one covering the whole neighborhood, well, what's that mean for the guy next door and the guy next door to him and the guy next door to him? You've only got so much free space in these frequencies that you're going to start stepping on each other and causing interference within that wireless band. And that leads us right into the discussion of wireless frequencies and channels. Now, the first thing I want you to catch is that the word channel is simply a human word, a you and I kind of word that we would have in conversation that describes a range of frequencies. You'll remember the old TVs, right? Your grandmother probably still has one with the little knob right here, and a lot of times there'll just be a bar up and down that you go click, 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 and you're literally changing channels. Well, those channels on your television are simply ranges of frequency that have been assigned to this little dial. What you're doing is changing the filter on the television to say, only listen to these wireless frequencies, which happen to be assigned to a different station. Now, I just gave the example of setting up a wireless access point that broadcasts across the entire neighborhood. And you might be thinking, well, is that true? I mean, do they all share just that 2.4 like it's one frequency? And the answer is no. Just like that television, we have channels in our wireless frequency, which are just a frequency set of 20 to 22 megahertz as they went through the different wireless standards and developed over the years. Some of the older ones had 22 megahertz, some of the newer ones are 20. So they just say, for instance, like channel 1 really represents a range of frequency that's about 20 megahertz wide, of which the center frequency is 2412. Now that's in megahertz, but we usually would say 2.412 gigahertz, right? That's why we always say the 2.4 gigahertz frequency spectrum. Now here is the big challenge that you run into with the 2.4 gigahertz frequency space especially, is look at these channels. What do you notice? Channel 2, channel 3, channel 4. They all kind of have an overlap right here with channel 1, right? I know I'm not tracing these exactly, but you see an overlap, and anytime you see an overlap in frequencies, that's going to run you into interference. And you see right at the bottom right here, I say the only non-overlapping channels in 2.4 gigahertz is 1, 6, and 11. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only channels that you can use, and that doesn't mean that's the only ones that don't overlap. For instance, if you were out in a big green field and you set up a wireless access point over here that was not in the range of anybody else, right, and you just chose channel 3 for that wireless access point, then you would be a non-overlapping channel, especially if someone else chose, I don't know, channel 9 or so, right? Because channel 9 looks like that frequency space ends about right there, and 3 ends about right there, right? You've got non-overlapping. What I'm talking about when I say non-overlapping is the most efficient non-overlapping, meaning if you use 3 and 9, there's only 13 channels, and in some places of the world, 14 channels available. Well, you're not going to truly get 3 clean channels if you use 3 and 9 in the United States anyway, because 9 overlaps with 13 and 12 and all that. You're only going to get 2, right? So the most efficient use we could make of these frequencies is by choosing 1, 6, and 11. You can see they're bolded right there in the non-overlapping space. Now, let's say you're sitting in a neighborhood or you're in a business and somebody like your neighbor chooses channel 3. And that leaves you in your house because his wireless access point beams into your space, right? It leaves you really scrambled because 1 and 6, are now being overlapped by your neighbor. What do you do about that? Nothing. Nothing at all. Maybe if you've got a good relationship with your neighbor, you could go knock on his door and be like, "Hey, bro, like, could I just reconfigure your WAP?" I'd probably do that, but I have pretty good relationships with my neighbor, and nor would they do that. They'd know enough not to put it on channel 3. Actually, not many people know what I'm telling you right now. So you do run into this all the time, and that's the challenge of these amateur frequencies that have been designated in the United States by the FCC. And whatever country you're listening to me, you have a organization, usually government owned, that designates these frequencies for use. And they say all of these are fair game for anybody as long as you're not malicious. Your neighbor's not malicious. No, you can't make that argument. As long as you're not maliciously trying to take out the spectrum, you can choose whatever channel you want. Well, this is the reason why the 5 gigahertz spectrum is the darling of the wireless industry. And it is good. People can't wait to phase out all that old equipment on their network, get new laptops that support 5 gigahertz and new IP cameras, let's get 2.4 out of there, or at least out of the mainstream that we use for our wireless and go with the 5 gigahertz. The first and most obvious benefit is the channels. I mean, look at this. Now, I didn't draw it in the same way that I did with 2.4 with all of the overlapping and all that, because none of these are overlapping. In 2.4, we had 1, 6, and 11. That was the only clean channels. Here we've got 36, 40, 44, 40. All of these are clean channels. Now, first and foremost, I want to emphasize it's not as good as it looks in this picture. They are introducing new channels all the time in the 5 gigahertz space. Over the last few years, the demand just continues to rise, but they're actually allocating stuff that is already allocated. What I mean by that is beginning at this channel 2, you see this Uni 2 band right here. They designate them. These are different groups of channels that they've made available. These are known as DFS, Dynamic Frequency Spectrum Channels, all the way up to 144, meaning they were already allocated for something. It's actually weather radar. So weather radar has the priority on those channels, but in most locations, weather radar doesn't use it all the time and doesn't use it often enough to really cause interference. So a lot of people are like, woohoo, all day, baby. I'm setting up stuff on these DFS spectrum because and I'm going to talk about the second one, opens the door for channel bonding. Take a look. Instead of just having a whole bunch of these tiny channels all over the place with 20 megahertz steps, if you will, between them, you can actually bond them together, 40, 80, 160 megahertz. And this is how we achieve above gigabit speeds on Wi-Fi. Now, I've never, and I'm talking to you right now at the end of 2017, I've never seen a business roll out 160 megahertz channels because, number one, there's no need for it. I mean, what kind of device are you running that you need to have that kind of bandwidth over Wi-Fi? And I know somebody's like, I got the device right here, baby, my laptop. But the problem is you take out, 8 channels to get that kind of bond, right? So that channel bonding is a huge benefit. What was I saying? I jumped off of that. Oh, yeah. I was talking about DFS and the weather radar and that kind of thing. With the DFS channels, what you end up with is the priority being given to what it was already allocated for, which is weather radar, which means at any given point in the day, bam, you could get something that takes out your whole spectrum, because weather radars are way more powerful than your little WAP. And so it caused your wireless network to go down. So a lot of people choose not to use those DFS spectrum channels. Instead, they just go with the safe ones right here that are approved for use. And also, keep in mind, when you see these things that are new and red, that means wireless equipment upgrade. Right? I mean, that could mean replacing all the WAPs in an organization. And it's not uncommon for an organization, a big one, to have hundreds of these things. And it, $400 or $500 a pop, that's an expensive venture to dive into this. So the other great thing is with, what is this, 8, 12, I haven't added them all up, clean channels that you get with 5 megahertz, you can allocate these well. So here's the challenge, and this will actually lead us into a lot of where we're going. When you lay out wireless inside of a building, you always do so with a floor plan. And the strategy, if you're using 2.4 gigahertz, is to use those 3 clean channels strategically. Like, here's a WAP, right? We'll put that on channel 1. Then we install another WAP, and we always have it being overlapping because we don't want dead zones in between our spheres of Wi-Fi, right? So this will be on channel 6, and then we install another WAP, and we have that guy be on, channel 11. And I know these are kind of oblong, and it's just a quick freehand, just to give you the idea, right? And then over here you go, okay, well, this guy's back on channel 1, and this is how you have to strategize your deployment to where you can have a user that has a wireless device that walks through, and it doesn't matter if he's standing right here in that middle ground of 3 different WAPs, he's okay because the channels are far enough apart in frequency that they don't interfere with each other, or at least they shouldn't. There are some special cases where it does. And this is all fine and dandy as long as we're talking about one story. And as long as we're talking about a business where there's no business here, or here, or here, or here, or houses, or apartment complex, or anything else that is using these, because if there is, you're going to get interference on these channels. Or if you add another story, oh my goodness, now you're complex, right? Take that thing 3-dimensional. Here's story number 1 where you've got, I can't even draw that, all these different spheres, and all that. And then you add another story, because remember, when you're talking about wireless spectrum, these things are omnidirectional. They've got an orb that goes out like this on all around. I can't draw a sphere, but that's a sphere, right? So when you're adding WAPs to the second story and you're sending out spheres down there, there's no way with 3 clean channels to be able to do this and not have some overlap. But in 5 gigahertz there is. And the benefit of 5 gigahertz is it actually doesn't travel as far. You remember when I was talking about the spheres originally at 2.4 and 5, I said 2.4 travels farther. And originally that was a big advantage, and now it's not, because we want our ideal design to be these little small spheres of coverage, right? Because the smaller they are, the easier it is to contain them and set up other wireless access points that they can jump into with just a strong, high-quality signal in its area. The problem comes in was when you bring in a WAP, or I'll give you a common issue. Someone brings in one of those cheap printers, and the printer is a WAP in itself. It's a wireless access point because the printer has a feature where it can have its own wireless network that people can join and automatically be able to print to that printer. Those things kick your butt inside of your organization. Somebody brings in a printer, and suddenly now you've got 5 users complaining that the network access is slow, or they never say it that way. They're like, the internet's slow, which sends you on a wild goose chase until you find out, days later, weeks later, months later, that this printer is just destroying your wireless network because it's a 2.4 gigahertz and it's blasting, the entire bottom floor of your building. That is why the more containable 5 gigahertz is actually far better than the extendable 2.4 gigahertz space. So I mentioned at the beginning of this final primer nugget, you will understand the purpose of the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi frequencies and the benefits and challenges of each. And now you have arrived. You have enough foundation knowledge that we're able to launch out into a customer location and start deploying Wi-Fi. We'll learn the rest of this, and there's still a lot to learn, don't worry. We'll learn it as we go. For now, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.